Yeah, all right. Well, hi everyone. It's a really sunny Friday out right now, so I really am humbled by your interest in my trip. I want to thank Hannah and the whole U team for this opportunity. Oh, I'm supposed to say who I am. Director of Communications at UW Bothell. And if you haven't been out to Bothell, I invite you to come and have a cup of coffee with me sometime. I want to thank Hannah and the whole U team for this opportunity. So as the event description indicated, my hope is to encourage you to define that one thing you want to do and to go for it. Is there something you gave up years ago, like I did, for any reason, real or imagined? Bring it back, make it happen. Remember, not now doesn't mean not ever. I also want to announce that we have a door prize, a prayer flag blessed at a monastery in Namche. Email me at mariala@uw.edu, and I'll draw a name at random over the weekend. Again, that's mariala@uw.edu. So before I officially start, I want to give you some eye candy. This is an avalanche that I got to see my final day on the way to base camp. So we'll just watch a short clip of it. And if you look up above the avalanche, there's like a snowy ridge. Beyond that is actually Everest, the south side of Everest. And there weren't many opportunities to see it, but you'll see it in this video, which should be playing soon. I just feel that I really lucked out to be able to see that. So to get started, in the spirit of the recent Academy Awards, as we know here at the university, collaboration is everything. And I could not have done this trek without the help of a lot of people. So I want to acknowledge them who are the people who are instrumental in my reaching anywhere near base camp. Multiple friends joined me on my training hikes, starting in April with my friend Michael Fagan, who is the most patient hiking partner ever, not to mention a great pace setter and spot-on weather forecaster. In addition to weekly hikes locally, in August, I rode bicycles in Paris and Lyon, hiked to Lac Wonk in Chamonix and Le Maux in the Chablis Alps, and conquered a Via Ferrata in Passy. I'll set up each day, show photos, and share my daily reflections. Now, because I wasn't with a group, not to mention it grew more difficult to talk the higher I climbed, most of what you'll hear are the thoughts that were going through my head. Of course, with many curse words edited out. You'll meet the few people I met, see the food I ate, and get a glimpse into what the people and animals do to keep tourism alive in this remote region. Now, you'll note that the images won't always match my words. Taking photos depended on if it was warm enough to take my hands out of my gloves. Don't let the sun fool you, as I would very soon find out. You're probably wondering why Everest and whether I've ever done anything like this before. All will be revealed. I looked up the date of the first hike and it was April 20th. In addition to my friends, I got to base camp almost 6 months to the day, largely due to the help of my coach, Courtney Sherman. It was Coach who suggested I set an intention for every day. She wisely gave me something else to focus on besides the very hard slog I knew it would be. Before I left, I asked friends to set intentions for me, and the trek felt less lonely with their words in my head. The intentions were magical. In fact, everything about this trip was as if by magic. Are we ready to go ever higher? A couple more slides here. That was the week before I left. So I boarded the plane, ready to reset per the intentions of my friends Anne and John. Everything was in place back home, so carefully planned out that for the first time in far too long, I had little on my mind. Resetting seemed possible. It was October 7th, the beginning of the Israel-Hamas war. I admit to feeling a little anxious as I flew into the Middle East. From Doha to Kathmandu, I had the amazing good fortune to sit next to a man named Jens Quermo. Low-key, quite assuming, the look of a seasoned traveler. He told me of some of his adventures around the world. This time he was going to Kathmandu to support his girlfriend, Kristen Harilla, who in the past year had set multiple speed records in the ascent of the 14 highest peaks in the world, feats I could only dream of. Earlier in the week, Tenjen Sherpa, her friend and trusted guide, who accompanied her up all those mountains, had vanished and was presumed dead in an avalanche. The talk of the time was there were 2 people on the mountain vying to be the first woman from America to conquer all 14 peaks, as Kristen had done. Lama was guiding one of them. Sadly, both women and their guides perished. Now, while this is an extreme, it is but one example of what the people of Nepal will do to keep tourism alive and food on their table. Lama's family had now lost 3 out of 4 brothers to a mountaineering event. One of the things Jens and I talked about on the flight was the more one puts oneself out there, the greater the chance that tragedy will strike. Records are made to be shattered, and as long as there are humans, there will always be someone trying to be faster, to go higher, using what's available to their advantage. Extreme athletes know the risks they're taking, and they continue to live life to the fullest extent possible. For those of us more risk averse, I still believe it's possible to be all in. It wasn't until I was in the taxi to my hotel that I had the chance to research Jens. I couldn't easily translate his website, it was in Norwegian, but it was clear he was a hotshot himself, an epic adventurer and documentary producer with a generous spirit. Even before I'd started this trek, I already had guarantees of the use of dogs in Greenland and horses in Mongolia. Monday, October 9th in Kathmandu. I arrived at the Nomad Hotel in the afternoon to a glass of refreshing watermelon juice. I was starting to get nervous. I decided to walk it off, but since the surrounding walks were primarily filled with shops selling things I didn't need, I went back to my hotel. My guide Srijan would meet me soon to go through my supplies and equipment, so I unpacked everything. Working from home had shown me that I could wear the same purple bathrobe for days on end. So having just one outfit for day and one for night didn't faze me. I wore the same thing every day. The bulk of my pack would be the extra layers I would need at night. Knowing it would be my last for a while, I luxuriated in a long, luxurious hot shower before supper. Anticipating a vegetarian diet for the next few weeks, at the restaurant, I ordered all the meat I could have on the menu. Back in my room, I packed and repacked until the pack felt right. At 20 pounds, it was about 5 pounds lighter than the weight I had trained with. That was reassuring, but as soon you'll learn, it was still too much. October 10th in Tamil, just after midnight. It wasn't part of the itinerary to be up this early, but for several reasons, all flights from Kathmandu to Lukla at the time were being routed through Ramchop Airport. So that's why I found myself on a dark street getting ready to get in a van full of men from around the world. Our flight wasn't until 8 o'clock, so I was a little annoyed that we had to hit the road so early for a 4-hour drive. A couple of hours in, the reason became clear. Away from the city, we were riding along endless rutted roads with hairpin turns and sheer drop-offs. They probably didn't want us to see what we were missing. The intention for the day, hope, from my friend John, kicked in. I hoped we would get to Ramchop in one piece. We parked just before 6 o'clock in an open area that had multiple vans of people in the same situation. The grounds would soon fill with all manner of trekkers with nowhere to go due to cloudy skies. For some reason, pilots won't fly into the most dangerous airport when they can't see it. Some had already been waiting several days to fly out, so I didn't hold any fantasies that I would be going anywhere. So that day's adventure would be to be present, to be chill, rest, and chat up anyone within talking distance. It was a wonderful day that didn't go as planned. Hope springs eternal. Wednesday, October 11th, my first cold shower on the books. At least there was water. According to my friend Mark, who'd been in Nepal some years ago, at one point I could expect someone to throw a tablespoon of water at me and call it a bath. Resilience, the day's intention, was an especially good one after the previous day. We got to the airport and it still looked too cloudy to fly. So my act of resilience was to stand by the counter with a smile on my face until someone let me on a plane. A few flights did get out before Lukla and Papalu, the two possible destination airports, closed. I wasn't on any of them. So resilience was hopping in a Jeep with another solo trekker and 5 Nepalese who were hitching a ride to who knows where and driving about 7 hours to get to a place where I could start trekking the next day. At that point, the newly chill Maria still thought, this is going to be awesome. The conditions were sometimes foggy, sometimes rainy, sometimes both, on somewhat paved mountain passes with unending hairpin turns that barely had enough room for 2 vehicles passing each other. In other words, it was much less than awesome. 7 hours later, we stopped. Although night was falling, I could still see the surroundings, and I couldn't discern a trail anywhere. So it turned out that had just been the first leg. Srijan broke the news that we would be transferring to an even more robust off-road rig to take us the rest of the way. Resilience was keeping me calm when I found out about yet another expense and yet another ride that was likely to twist my organs in a knot. I was angry at having to pay for such a large vehicle when it was just me, knowing I was likely being charged extra to pay for the other passengers. I had to walk away. I just walked away and gave myself permission to behave like a spoiled tourist for a few minutes. I'm allowed, right? But in the end, what could I do? I returned to the group of men waiting around, and in a huff, yes, I admit it, in a huff, I told Srijan that I was unhappy with the lack of clarity and the fact that I had no choice but to agree. I assured him I would be fine and to leave me alone. And then we were on our way in a huge Land Rover type meant for 5 people comfortably. There were 7 of us, plus we managed to pick up another passenger along the way who endured the ride in the open air bed with the gear. Squished into the back with 3 other people, I braced myself for the serious off-roading ahead. Little did I know just how treacherous and dangerous and frightening and exhilarating it would be. Before the night was over, we would go another 7.5 hours on rocky, jutted, rutted, often impassable mountain trails, not even an actual road, which in spots had narrow switchbacks about every 75 yards. We would forge raging creeks that were up to 20 feet wide and slog through mud that was a foot deep in places, in the dark. Not a lot of pictures of that, but I'm going to describe you what I saw. So if I had been on a flight, I would have missed a lot of the sites locally. So I got to see sites such as the houses from simple to 2-story, a few rivaling the size of along the shores of Lake Washington, randomly built at the side of the road and literally perched on cliffs. I couldn't even imagine the resilience of building those houses. It was hard to see if they were inhabited. There were few lights. Maybe they turned off electricity when they went to bed. One house stood out because it was brick. I wonder who lived there. Piles of big stones, wondering how they got there and why they were where they were. The falling down fences made of 1- and 2-inch round tree branches along the road surrounded by overgrown bushes. What exactly were they meant to keep out or contain? The rig with a flat tire carrying trekkers in the other direction, meaning they were headed home. If they couldn't fix it, it would be a long night of sleeping upright, waiting for daylight, and possibly missing their flight home wherever that was. The occasional construction projects that in the dark looked abandoned. What were they meant to be? Would they still be? And why in the middle of nowhere on such horrible roads that are mainly to transport trekkers and goods? The group of young men playing tennis at the side of the road, illuminated only by 2 regular light bulbs. But why at 10 o'clock at night? The home restaurants every few miles, all closed, made me even more grateful for the one we found open when we pulled up for supper just before 11 o'clock. The resilience of the wandering dog, the only sign of life for several miles. The calm way the drivers maneuvered around each other when trying to pass. Now, keep in mind, these were mountain trails, not roads. Without a word or a loud honk, they just did a dance of balance, negotiating inch by the light of the headlights until each was clear, backing up several hundred feet if necessary. There were no pissing contests as there are in the States, no machismo. I got to visit with the other trekker in the group, a doctoral candidate in neuroscience. He was the second person I met over the past 2 days trekking solo only with a guide. He had my father's name, something that delighted me to no end. We found lodging at 1:30 the next morning and curricula, again, an unexpected stop. In just a few hours, I would begin my tea house trek. I'd lost 2 full days, so it was unlikely I would hit the high passes I fantasized about. But even if I didn't take another step, I had already traveled 1,000 miles since the weekend. I'll get to the trail eventually, I promise. So Thursday, October 12th in Boopsa, an unexpected stop. I totally bonked on day one. There's no sugarcoating it. At just 2 miles in, I couldn't go any farther. I stopped to rest, already fatigued. What? I had trained hard with my pack at a much heavier weight. I felt strong and confident, if a little anxious. Here I was, finally on the trail. I didn't really know what to expect, but I certainly didn't expect to be exhausted so soon. Figured maybe I started uphill too fast. No problem. I would focus on taking deeper breaths and slowing down. When that didn't work, I tried to self-diagnose. Chest heavy, a little lightheaded, my legs were fine. Lack of sleep, little since the flight from Seattle to Doha, and none at all during the 15-hour drive. Jet lag always hits me hard. I'd eaten plenty of carbs and drank plenty of water, but perhaps not enough for the sweltering conditions. Something else I wasn't prepared for. Maybe it was nerves. I was overdressed, not heeding someone's advice to always start cold. I was sweating buckets. I stripped down on top to just my sports bra after checking with Srijan that doing so wouldn't be frowned upon. The elevation was higher than my training height. That could cause a lightheadedness. I was determined. I repeated, each step is getting me closer to the next village, over and over, and that gave me hope. I told myself I could look forward to sleep because surely after that day, it would come fast and be deep. I also started thinking of options because so far I wasn't having any fun on the actual trek, though a lot before. I thought whatever possessed you to think hiking uphill for days on end would be fun. I could completely change my itinerary. I had already lost 2 days, so that meant at the end, the buffer I had, I wasn't even going to be able to do any sightseeing. I could do some hiking. I could go to Bangkok to have some clothes made. I could check into a 5-star hotel, but I trained so hard. And I really wasn't feeling good. Another stop to rest. I wasn't wearing corrective lenses, so I expected things far away would not be in full focus. So I really tried to listen to my body. And all of a sudden I realized that things up close were cloudy and I had a hard time seeing. So I started to panic. This had happened before. Heat stroke. No wonder I felt better each time I drank more water. I was completely dehydrated. From experience, I knew I needed to drink until I could urinate, and I needed to rest and literally cool down. In hindsight, it must have hit me hard because I already wasn't making good decisions by forging ahead despite how I obviously felt. Up and up and up to find a tea house. A local said the next village was 30 minutes away, and to me at that point, it just seemed like forever. But I had little choice. I refused to retreat, and I did not want to call the team doctor. Slow steps, deep breaths. After only about 20 minutes, there was the unmarked tea house at the top of the long climb. I actually hesitated to stay because the next 3 kilometers were just a gentle roll, so maybe I could keep going and get my groove. Thankfully, Srijan was thinking more clearly. I had an energy drink, drank some water, took a sleeping pill, and passed out for 5 hours. I awoke to more dalbat, more water, and finally I urinated for the first time around 8 o'clock that night. Literally a relief. I was going to be okay. No need for a rescue. I wasn't sure what I would do in the morning. I went to bed thankful for the rest, for being the only guest in the spare tea house with a kind, attentive owner, the soft rain, and for the learning. I buried the lead. That day's intention was sunshine. Michael, my hiking partner, knows all the good things it means to me. Usually a joy. Who knew the detrimental effects it would have on my very first day of the trek? So Friday the 13th in Cirque, I was above altitude. After a miserable first day, my trek started off on the right foot that morning. It kept going for nearly 9 miles. Focusing on Kristen's intention to reclaim your badass self got me through a couple of tight spots. No doubt the only reason I made it as far as I did that day and forward is I hired a porter. It was a hard decision to make given the trek was supposed to be self-supported, but I needed to minimize exertion in the exposed sections to lessen the chance of another episode of heat stroke. I had meds for altitude mountain sickness to increase my red blood cell count and to alleviate an upset stomach, but not for heat stroke. I couldn't afford to lose another day. Letting go of the pack seemed the best choice. I didn't even care what about the expense. I felt better about being a wimp when Srijan said, look at it this way, you're providing him with employment and a living wage, not to mention a break from carrying up to 200 pounds. 200 pounds expected of a porter. The trail was TOUGH tough. Loads of rocks from the rock slides or decaying stone steps, which meant a lot of scrambling. Now that in itself slows things down, but it was especially treacherous because heavy rains the night before made for very slippery conditions, especially areas where there was also moss. I was a little nervous because I'd hurt my shoulder in a rock climbing class some years ago, and I didn't want to re-injure it, but I did anyway. In the photos, you'll soon see a bulldozer with people approaching it. Where the dozer is the current end of the road, and it's all foot travel from there, except for the occasional helicopter rescue. Something else I hope to avoid. There you'll see the bulldozer. So they were extending the road, which would definitely not be paved. It would still be dirt and rocks, but still it would be a track that would make it easier to get goods to the many tiny villages along the route. So as the bulldozer clawed out sections, it dumped the rocks, dirt, and trees and vegetation off to the side, sometimes over the edge, but also over the trail. So we basically didn't have a trail. So there was a traffic jam of about 50 to 60 people, you'll see them here, relying on whoever was ahead to bush back a trail to the trail without anything to do the whacking. Most people were fine with waiting their turn, including the newly chill Maria, who in another life would have had a plan and organized a work party. And I have to say, if there hadn't been a language barrier, I might have attempted to. So there we were, following an unseen leader who was completely swallowed up by trees as soon as they went through them. The best one could do was watch what the person in front of them did and follow suit. Place foot here on the slippery patch of leaves, grab the section of twigs, watch out when they let go of whatever they're holding on to, or it'll snap you in the face. At the same time, people were coming from the other direction. It was organized chaos at its best. Like the journey in the dark, there were no loud voices and infinite amounts of patience. So this all went well for a while. But at some point, those soaked leaves and those slippery rocks would give way after too many people pulling on them in those wet conditions. Of course, it would happen to me. Srijan went through. I grabbed the long blades of grass and of trees that he had just released and pulled them right out of the dirt. So it happened quickly, but I think I did a free fall forward and somehow danced a couple of steps through the debris underfoot and turned in time to avoid a branch in my face. I was screaming, other people were screaming, chaos seemed possible, but then we calmed down. I was grateful again that I wasn't carrying my pack and gave thanks to the tree that stopped me. The final hurdle was sliding down a chute of about 15 feet. Now, I can only guess that it started out with the leads kicking out the vegetation and placing footholds in the dirt. But by the time we got to it, it was just a muddy mess of soil, straight down with nothing to hold on to. So now it was my turn. Completely freaked out, right? I looked to the side for an alternative, and I didn't see one. The people behind me were patient. My nerves were on overdrive because there was a possibility that once I slid down, I would just keep going. So the intention kicked in. Reclaim your badass self. I threw my poles down and went sliding down feet first. The impact of hitting the ground threw my shoulders back, re-injured it, but at least I hit the ground and didn't go over the edge. Despite the few adrenaline-powered tears once I got it together, badass self reclaimed. Saturday on the way to Pack Ding, October 14th. Be generous with yourself. When Cleo gave me this intention, I knew it could be the hardest one of all. So hard, I didn't know where to begin. The intention I needed was to be hard on myself. I have to get this done today. I better make it good, and I better do it fast. The newly chill Maria had started to stress out, and she hadn't eaten breakfast. And this was the first lesson. Things don't always have to be big and grand. If you know me, you know. Having recently done some breath work, I inhaled expectations and exhaled self-compassion. I had barely started, but already I was worried about finishing the day, given I went from barely completing 2 miles to nearly 9. Friday took a lot out of me. Sleep remained elusive, even with a sleep aid. So after taking a 2-hour nap in the afternoon, I again didn't sleep at all that night. I was so groggy. And here I was headed to the second highest elevation I'd ever been. For the most part, the trail was less muddy, but the rocks and stone steps were tricky to maneuver, especially since they were best suited for people with longer strides. I was anxious to get going and started out a bit fast, which ruined my breath. But then I channeled Michael pacing me and calmed down. In the spirit of generosity, I started to repeat, I can do this, with every exhale. Each time the negative self-talk started, generosity shut it down. From, what were you thinking when you decided to take on this epic and expensive endeavor? Can you really hike for days on end? Who do you think you are? You are not someone who climbs big mountains. It's only going to get harder from here. I switched to, I can do it. Each step gets me closer. I'd followed a training plan and it worked. Coach said I was ready in August after Paris. I'm proud of what I'd accomplished. I'd worked hard and had every right to be there with repeat trekkers and elite athletes who were practically running up the trail. I owed myself this selfish gift. Generosity extended to getting not only momos for lunch, but also asking for a fried egg. That felt decadent in this land of spare resources, almost disrespectful in my mind. But an egg sounded so good after copious carbo loading, and it was delicious. Srijan, too, was generous with me. Without knowing the day's intention, he said I was doing well, better than the day before. When a woman rode by on a mule while her companion was on foot, I jokingly said, trekking on a mule is an option. Can I do that? He looked at me in all seriousness and said quietly, you're stronger than that. That was high praise for someone who has let her body go for many years. We got to the junction of the main trail to base camp finally, and I was immediately grateful for the delays that led us first to be on the paths less traveled. Without knowing it at the time, it worked well for the newly chill Maria to experience the beauty and serenity and solitude of not only the surroundings, but also the people themselves. Once on the main trail that day, there were traffic jams, loud, impassioned voices, more commercialism, and self-imposed pressure to go faster for the sake of the multiple groups trudging along behind me. As we approached Pack Ding, Srijan suggested we stop for the day. I felt I had it in me to go farther, and doing so would make the challenging trek to the next village stop a little less long. The generosity won out, and I decided against going big and grand. Had we gone ahead, I would have missed the hot shower that was available at the tea house where we stayed. What a gift to unexpectedly be able to wash away the grit, sweat, and grime of the week. More importantly, in that moment, I would have missed a small birthday celebration for one of the travelers in a large group. Being there meant being included when it was time for cake. It was a small slice, but it was just enough to quell my wanting sweet tooth. Sunday, October 15th. Stu's intention to look around despite the physical demands, don't forget to look around, showed up at the right time. The trail from Pakding to Namche was supposedly 3 hours straight up after crossing a high bridge. Were it not for her words, I would have just kept my head down so I didn't have to see what was up ahead. If you're a hiker, you know what that's like. The night before, Laura texted me, strength. I decided to double up for extra motivation. Turns out I psyched myself out. For those who've hiked around here, Srijan's description of straight up was different than mine, which to me is locally like West Tiger or Mount Washington. His was more an unrelenting series of short switchbacks uphill. Definitely challenging, but not like the top part of McClellan Butte. I looked around as Sue suggested, and I saw the toy house that someone had stuck under a waterfall, quilts hanging from a window, the intricate headpiece some mules wore, and the layers of blankets that protected their backs from heavy loads, the very handsome man who offered to take my picture in front of the national park entrance, the various goods that porters were transporting, including bags of cement, the way the prayer flags and bits of cloth swayed in the heavy wind as I was crossing the bridge to Namche. Don't forget, email me if you want to win this prayer flag. And I had my first heart sighting. I mentioned to Srijan that often when I travel, I see hearts a lot. Yet here it took nearly a week to come across one. He replied, you don't need to see a heart painted somewhere. It is how we live. You see hearts every time you see someone who is Nepalese. Beautiful. My strength kicked in big time. We thought it could take up to 8 hours to complete. We came in at about 6. Enjoy a few more photos. Monday, October 16th, being lazy in Namche. Heart balance from Greta was a perfect intention to draw on a day reserved for acclimatizing. The relaxed day meant a late big breakfast. I'd been sticking to eggs and toast when given a choice since I discovered the combo didn't upset my stomach. I'd been curious about the apple porridge, but since I didn't know what it was and it included milk, I didn't want to be on the trail and get an upset stomach. It ended up being a thick oatmeal with chunks of apple, and it was really tasty. Acclimatizing means walking around for a few hours and letting your body adjust. But after such a big breakfast and little sleep again, I stuck to balance and asked for a break, promising that I would walk in the afternoon. I did want to see Namche, full of shops and restaurants, since the other villages were simply a handful of tea houses and places to eat. By the way, I discovered another gift of the weather delays. The extra miles meant that my body was getting used to the altitude and elevation. We started way in like 2 villages before the actual trail. So by the time I got there, I didn't have any problems with altitude sickness at all. I was really grateful. I couldn't sleep, so I spent some time reflecting on the intention. As a Libra, I inherently heart balance. When I see wrong that I can right, I do it. When I see wrong that I can't even possibly influence, I hurt to my core. It was hard to have only sporadic access to the outside world and not to be in community with friends who were directly or indirectly impacted by the atrocities post October 7th, including my hiking partner, Michael. I just didn't know what was going on. I was bothered by how differently Srijan, Arjun, and I were treated. At mealtime, I got my meal first, and theirs came much later after all trekkers had been served. The kitchens were small and spare, so depending on how full the tea house was, it could be anywhere from 30 minutes to up to 2 hours before they could eat. Sleeping quarters were also out of balance. As much as I liked my space, it just felt wrong that I had a room with 2 beds, while sometimes Arjun slept outside. The afternoon was spent climbing high above the village, watching workers excavate stone out of the hill and carry it down on their backs, and stopping briefly at a monastery. I saw a trekker waiting for a heli rescue and resolved again that I would finish what I'd started. And then, to restore some balance in my body, I decided to schedule a massage. Looking at the services, I opted for deep tissue. The manager looked me up and down and said, "That's the hardest pressure. I don't think you would like it." I replied, "Trust me, I will love it." Despite the massage therapist's best attempts, she couldn't break this badass. Tuesday, October 17th, from Namche to Tengboche. Jonathan, who was on a big adventure in Spain, wrote me, listen carefully, act fully. The whole week had been turned inward. I had heard few American accents and had largely been isolated with my thoughts. According to Jonathan, to listen to carefully is to listen to the deepest inner prompt. It means listening inwardly to what you know is the deepest, highest impulse in you, to the greatest degree you are capable of, that doesn't come dressed in fear, but rather from the warm heart that is steeped in real truth and the peace that is beyond the fear. It is clear, crystalline, and needs no trappings. When one listens to what it says, then actually acting fully becomes an obvious next step. So we listen carefully and act fully. Without having to think about it, two deep prompts poke their little heads out almost immediately. I wanted to stuff them back where they came from because they were emotionally charged, and acting on them would expose some vulnerabilities I wasn't prepared for. I can report that while I listened carefully, I have yet to act. Going to catch my breath while you enjoy some scenes from the day. Wednesday, October 18th, my birthday in Dingboche. If it hadn't been for the delays, I would have been on my way to base camp that morning. I obviously knew I wouldn't make it there that day, but I was still a little put off. A big day for me, and it was just going to be another slog. Yes, the spoiled tourist rears her ugly head again. High clouds followed us for much of the trek, so we couldn't see the mountain range in the far distance. But as I sat down for breakfast, Shijan came to me and said, "Your birthday wish came true." I thought it was sweet. He knew I was disappointed that I wouldn't see Everest that day, and I wondered what he had up his sleeve. He led me outside and motioned for me to look to the left. The sky had cleared, and as I glanced up, there she was, way off in the distance. What a gift. Way off in the distance. I think you can see my arrow. It looks close, but it wasn't. Anyway, it was really a gift. For about 3 hours, the mother of all mountains was out. Then the clouds returned and views were once again obscured the rest of the day. Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? This intention from Kathy in the form of a quote from Mary Oliver was a perfect one to draw on my birthday. It's been one of my favorites for years, and I had yet to answer it. After the 3-day delay, my focus over the past 8 was Plus Ultra, my friend Peter's boarding school's motto, ever higher. That and taking in the majestic beauty that is the Himalayas, marveling at the initiative, innovation, fortitude, and resilience of their people, avoiding injury, walking around or over and endless piles of mule and yak dung. You couldn't go more than a few steps without the opportunity to step on a fresh, pungent, or dried mound. Trying to engage fellow trekkers with minimal success. Adjusting clothing as my body temperature changed, taking meds to prevent AMS, and fueling up on 3 meals loaded with carbs. When not upright, I was in my sleeping bag in my unheated room, trying to stay warm in sub-freezing temperatures. Only dining rooms are heated in tea houses, and only during supper. Early on, I was ensconced in my cocoon liner in a base layer top and bottom, with a vest also on top. I piled on layers as needed, thick wool socks, trekking pants, a fleece, and then a thick down coat with a hood. Later, I added down gloves and down camp booties. That night, I was also wearing sweater tights and a down vest. I was saving my ski pants, second down coat, and down Elmer Fudd hat for the highest sleeping elevation. As much as I wanted to stick toe warmers all over my body, I was saving them in case frostbite reared its ugly head. This was the first time I'd ever been truly away from work and my commitment as a caregiver. Except for one work email thread that was being copied to my personal account, I hadn't thought about projects or deadlines. The person I take care of was in great hands, with my siblings and dear friends covering for me. Now, if you're a caregiver, you know how invaluable this level of support is. And I couldn't disappear to such a remote region for this long without it. So I'd had a lot of time to think about my wild and precious life, and to really own the thoughtful intentions from friends who knew me well, if not best. It was such a gift to bring them along on this epic, largely solitary journey. Some folks told me that I'd meet a lot of people along the way and make friends for life. I hadn't found that to be true, not yet. I was always on the move, and at night it was hard to infiltrate the groups of trekkers at supper because of language barriers or because they were immersed in discussing strategy for the next day with their guides. As soon as we finished eating, we were in our sleeping bags trying to get warm. My longest conversation was in Tengboche with a couple of worldwide trekkers from Quebec. They told me they had abandoned their plans at the next village, where I was then, and filled my head with their difficulties of adjusting to elevation, not being able to get warm, and suffering massive headaches. When they expressed complete shock that I had never trekked anywhere before, yet here I was going ever higher in the Himalayas. They confirmed my growing sense of imposter syndrome that Coach Court had allayed but was starting to return. I couldn't wait for them to leave, but since we were the only guests in the dining room, I was stuck. Their chatter was not at all supportive. So what will I do with this one wild and precious life? I still couldn't answer it, though I had solidly identified some desires moving forward. What I could say is thus far I'd made more friends than enemies, done more good than harm, and righted more wrongs than contributed to the world's ill. I am blessed beyond measure. And Srijan found me a slice of birthday cake. Thursday, October 19th, still in Dingboche. This day was strictly to acclimatize and rest. Since the intentions were randomly chosen, I couldn't fulfill Jill's intention of describing the smell of a rainy day. The sun was out and there wasn't a drop. But through a stuffy nose, I could smell dust whipping in the wind, fresh yak dung, wood burning for cooking, garlic in my noodle soup, and the sweet smell of accomplishment. Another pause while you see what acclimatizing looks like. You have to excuse me, I'm getting teary just looking at these pictures. Still can't believe I was there. Friday, October 20th, on the way to Labuche. At the end of the day, I was too cold and too exhausted to string two thoughts together. The conditions were the harshest yet, the elevation ever higher. It was 20 degrees and would soon drop to 18. The gain was less than 2,000, but it might as well have been 10. My emotions got the best of me. Trying hard to fulfill Heather's intention to embrace the moment every time it got hard, which was pretty much most of the 9.5 miles, I would repeat to myself, embrace the moment, you won't get it back. It didn't make it any easier, but it did help to shift my attitude. At one point, absolutely unbidden, out of nowhere, I heard my father say, in exactly the gentle tone he used to say it, "Come on, kid, you can do it." Cue the tears. My father, the traveler, the adventurer, the pioneer, the World War II guerrilla who never wavered in his belief in me in support of anything I set my mind to, showed up at just the right time. It was still a slog, but my chest expanded and I was better able to regulate my breaths. You're right, I can do it. So not long after, I heard the sound of a beloved song. Someone up ahead had external speakers. I see skies of blue and clouds of white, the bright blessed day, the dark sacred night. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. It was just the most magical song to hear at that moment. Up and up and up we went. It seemed to take forever, but the timestamp on photos showed that only about 70 minutes had passed since lunch. I looked up. We had arrived at the Everest Memorial at Tukla Pass. Words can't begin to express how I felt. I couldn't breathe, but it wasn't the elevation or the ascent. Here were memorials to the likes of not only Rob Hall and Scott Fisher, but also to many who had perished on the mountain. I'll wait for the video to catch up. And actually, I'm going to fast forward. Here we go. Now we're at the memorial. So it was Rob Hall and Scott Fisher and their heroic efforts to save their clients who captured my spirit 27 years ago. I walked around feeling their ghosts and that of many others and spending time at Hall's memorial. I plan to visit Fisher's on the way back. I'm also going to fast forward here with lots of pictures of this memorial. Oops. Here we go. An hour later, we reached the site of a helicopter crash from the weekend before. I don't know what happened, but I heard the pilot survived. When we finally reached our stop for the night, I was physically and emotionally spent and freezing. I couldn't feel my toes or my nose. The last thing I could do was get excited about the place we were staying, the Everest K2 Scientific Research Center, or the room reserved for me in the actual pyramid, a rare offering to guests. Under different conditions, I would have been awestruck at the big and grand opportunity. But when I walked into my room, the window was open and it felt like an icebox. Even Srijan thought it was cold, and I doubted it would warm up enough to be acceptable to even the most stoic of Sherpas. So I made the second best choice of the trip. I embraced the moment and repeatedly thanked the research scientists who greeted us and allowed me to stay in that room, but I said, no thanks. I splurged on the use of an electric blanket. It hadn't been an option at previous tea houses, so they obviously knew that at this elevation, the most fragile of their guests would be in a bad way. Before I went to my room, I did tell Srijan, to more tears, that I simply didn't know I had it in me to go any higher. I was so close, but I was really miserable. My spirit was overwhelmed and I wasn't feeling confident. The cold, the wind, the altitude, the elevation gain, the fear took over. I was disappointed and proud of the fact I was almost 2,000 feet higher than Mount Rainier. The last push could break me. Saturday, October 21st, the big day. I woke up and realized that at some point I had taken off my heavy wool socks. The electric blanket, threadbare as it was, had done its job. I was feeling cautiously optimistic. I still needed to be realistic about how hard the previous day had been, and that getting to EBC would likely be twice as challenging given the higher altitude and the temperature. Did I have it in me? Srijan, who'd monitored my progress the entire trek, thought I did. I was grateful for the distraction of two intentions, one randomly chosen from Dennis, what in my life has led me here, and one, a final reminder from Coach Court earlier in the week to take it one step at a time. What indeed led me here? My desire for adventure, my propensity for unique and out of the norm, a need to stop being a human doing, to get truly away from my life. Was I trying to prove something? What and to whom? The time spent reflecting gave me the responses to this intention. Coach's one step at a time became a mantra that got me through as I struggled, really struggled with every step. I kid you not, it was like this. One step, plant right foot and exhale. Plant left foot, exhale. Time, plant right foot, inhale. One step, time. It was that slow, all the way to the Khumbu icefall. Fast forward just a bit here. Oops. There we go. Then we arrived at the place where dreams are made real or dashed to bits, where Everest climbers pitched their tents and set up camp for months on end, where the teams from the May 96 tragedy started their ascent and where attempts for the rescue were coordinated and largely unsuccessful. I walked around taking it all in, imagining tents and climbers in season. I don't know how many others were there with me, 100, maybe more, but for me, they didn't exist. I just went about my way, taking photos with my phone and making memories with my eyes, not seeing or hearing anyone else. After about 30 minutes, we headed down toward the horses waiting for people who didn't want to walk back to La Bouche. I had fully intended to do the entire trek, whatever it turned out to be, on my own power. But as the hours stretched on going up, when we neared base camp, I started to calculate what the conditions might be by the time we headed down. The wind was already whipping, the sun would be setting behind the mountains, and the temperature would be dropping quickly. I berated myself for leaving my headlamp behind at the pyramid. Going back didn't mean downhill all the way. It was filled with elevation gains and losses, at least half of it a rock scramble. The trail at times teetered along a high drop-off. A misstep would have most certainly resulted in injury. Intention be damned. I was physically, emotionally, and mentally spent. And once the cold came on, I would be miserable and insufferable. All of a sudden, I understood why we came across so many trekkers on horses headed down. They weren't injured as I thought. They were just done. There she is, right? Way back there. That's Everest. So long story short, I ended up taking a horse on the way down. I was totally psyched about this. I'd only been on a horse once, along a flat stretch of the Oregon coast. So then I got on Rambo and trusted my life to him and his handler, who was leading him along. I have to say, after a while, I just started screaming most of the way down. It was so treacherous. The horse would have to jump over these rocks, and there were times when it just felt like I was just going to go over the edge. After about 3 hours later, we reached the pyramid, and I can't remember the last time I was so grateful for my feet to touch the ground, wobbly as they felt. Well, let's see, I think there might be another video of it. Did you already see a video? I can't remember if the video showed before this or not. Oh, here it is.
Okay.
I know we're at about time. I'm sorry about that. So I'll stop it here and I will continue. Shoot for the moon. Even if you missed, you'll land among the stars. I started to think about how I wanted to spend this birthday nearly a year ago. As much as I enjoyed big parties with friends, I selfishly wanted this one to be for me alone. For several reasons, for quite a number of years, life required that I set aside some of the activities I love most, including my fascination with mountain adventures. I had no fantasies of climbing the great mountain, just reading the accounts of treks and determination and resilience and fortitude were enough to fill my propensity for big and grand and unique. While I abandoned my adventurous pursuits, clearly the mountain never really left my heart. For the first thing that came to mind for how to spend my birthday was go to Nepal. In January, I called my friend Seth, who's with the School of Nursing, who co-founded a company in Nepal that specializes in fast packs, climbs, and treks. He suggested I do the fast pack already scheduled for October. I didn't want to be part of a group, so the idea grew to a more realistic solo tea house trek. In the end, I shot for the moon, the Chola High Pass, so I could visit other villages on the way back. Losing 3 days put a damper on that idea from the start. An option was to take a helicopter ride back, but after being startled by heli after in such a magnificent place, and subscribing to Ed Viester's mantra that getting to the top is optional, getting down is mandatory, I decided I would turn around after reaching base camp. I had landed among the stars. Namaste.